Please welcome Dr. Nagler.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Ruby, for that wonderful introduction. I am so very pleased to be here. It's a strange time to be away from Berkeley. All kinds of interesting things are happening there right now. And I'm afraid if I stay away any longer, I might be a roadie. I also have one other concern to share with you, and that is that I also am afraid that I might end up remystifying Gandhi in India by the time the evening is over. But let's see, I will do as best that I can. What I've put up on the screen are two important websites, the first being the website of the meditation center, the ashram where I live, and the second being the website for our own nonviolence education center in Berkeley, the Meta Center. And it's on that second website where you can get a whole bunch of wonderful things, of course. You can even donate. But in particular, the webcast of my year-long nonviolence course is available through that site. We know that probably well over 100,000 people have visited that course on the web, and we're working now to reduce it and make it, because it's 58 hours and some of the jokes are really very bad. We want to get rid of them, condense it, and make it more available. Well, on February 1st of 1948, in other words, the morning after the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi, there was an American journalist, Webb Miller, who was down in the south of the country, and although he was a hardened journalist and had seen many things in his career, he was overwhelmed by the outpouring of grief that 3.5 million people were expressing. He'd never been in a situation like that, and he asked one of his Indian friends, "What is happening here?" And his informant told him, "We believe that there was a mirror in the Mahatma in which there was reflected the very highest of which we are capable. And now these people are afraid that that mirror has been shattered." So I've devoted my career to the belief that that mirror has not been shattered, and that we are actually going to try to take a peek into it in a little way this evening. I got the idea for this talk from a book by David Solnit, who's a Bay Area author, which was called Globalize Liberation. In other words, we heard about globalizing all kinds of awkward and unpleasant and violent things, but this collection was about globalizing liberation, how to uproot the system and build a better world, which is very appealing, but it struck me that Gandhi would actually go the other way around. Build a better world, and that would make the system so weak that it would fall away by itself. That was part of his genius. I also was impressed by Richard Falk, who has been coining the term globalism from above to describe the kind of globalism that's done by corporations. And if you want to read about how that system works, I might recommend a book by John Perkins called The Confessions of an Economic Hitman, but don't read it just before you go to sleep. It is one hard piece of reading. And Zinn writes that while all of this stuff is very dangerous and very destructive and very harmful, he says, there is a counterculture. There are community newspapers, bookstores throughout the country, and if you're aware of all of that, and you don't allow yourself to be overwhelmed by the images that you see in the mass media, you get a sense of an enormous potential for change in this country. So what I'm going to try to address this evening is how can we actualize that potential, which is just, at the moment, lying dormant while things are marching cheerfully in the other direction. And this, of course, is where Gandhi's pioneering genius comes in. He had the incredible knack of mobilizing people's passions in a way that has never been duplicated. My own spiritual teacher at the Blue Mountain Center, Eknath Ishwaran, was not a political person. And incidentally, I don't know if you believe in coincidences and We call this in Berkeley the woo-woo factor. But just as I was leaving Art and Gail's house, they got their copy of the Blue Mountain newsletter. So I brought it up here to share with you. This is a free newsletter that you can subscribe to tell you about what goes on at our meditation center. Anyway, Ishran at that time was not Sri Ishran, he was just Eknath Ishran, and he was young. He met Gandhi and was overwhelmed by the man's power and his presence. He saw him in meditation on a spot that I actually visited in pilgrimage a couple of years ago, and he said that it looked to him as though 2,500 years had melted away and he was looking at the compassionate Buddha sitting in front of him. While the campaigns were going on, Ishran was so affected that when Gandhi went on a hunger strike, he felt unable to eat. I just want to give you a sense of the depth of the way this man reached into people's minds and hearts in an uncanny way that has not been replicated anywhere. So let's look at a clue as to how we can use Gandhi to actualize the potential for change and growth that does exist out there. This clue would come from one of Gandhi's great admirers, E.F. Schumacher. Now, if you're in my age group, you would weep tears of recognition at hearing that name. Schumacher was one of the very first to try to break out of the centralization and the kind of globalism and the addiction to bigness that we all suffer from. I'm sure you've heard that joke. What would the Frenchmans write a thesis about an elephant? It would say one thing. German thesis on the elephant would say another thing. The American thesis would be how to build a bigger elephant. Well, Schumacher wrote a book called Small is Beautiful, which was interesting enough, but I want to talk about the subtitle, which, in case you remember it, it was Economics as If People Mattered. That's really the theme of my talk, and I really think it is the clue to Gandhi's practical idealism, as he called it. For him, people always mattered, even if they were his opponent, even if they were giving him trouble. It is said of one particular political figure toward the latter part of Gandhi's career that this man had a problem for every solution that Gandhi could come up with. But there's an amazing bit of footage that you can see of Gandhi walking into this man's house for a meeting, putting his hand on his shoulder, the genuine love and affection that he felt for him. It could not be faked. It's real, it's unbelievable. This man was thwarting everything that Gandhi was trying to do. I do not feel that way about my colleagues at Berkeley who did the same thing for me, but then I'm not Gandhi. Now, so this idea of X as if people mattered has caught on, politics as if people mattered, environmentalism as if people mattered. And I think this is really a key. We are getting a hold of something here. Getting people to matter to us is the key to globalization from below, to globalization of peace and justice instead of the globalization of greed that we're facing now. And I think that forgetting that people matter is the ultimate violence. Hannah Arendt, famous political scientist, defined totalitarianism in the following way. Totalitarianism strives not toward despotic rule over men and women, but toward a system in which men and women are superfluous. So obliterating the significance of people is the end product of totalitarian development. And I'm afraid that this system that we have today is exemplifying that. There are two acronyms that I'm going to be using, and the first one, if you haven't heard it, is POSIWID, which stands for the purpose of a system is what it does. We hear wonderful things about how, for example, the economic system is going to trickle wealth down to the poor, and it goes on and on and on, and what you notice after 25 years is that it has trickled up. Similarly, we have this hideously exploitive system which is destructive to the planet and to her human beings. If you read what the system is supposed to do, it's very encouraging, but the purpose of the system is what it does. If the kind of energy that it captures is a destructive energy. By the way, I'm going to get away from the negative stuff pretty soon in case you're starting to get depressed. We're going to get into the good stuff in a little while. But I have coined an expression recently because people are always coming to me, since nonviolence teacher and advocate, and I'm dealing with very small groups, individuals. People come to me and say, yes, but this isn't going to change policy. We need a different kind of people in power. My contention is it's not all about a different kind of people in power. It's about a different kind of power in people. That's what I'm going to be trying to talk about. So how do we globalize this? Gandhi, again, was the one person who devoted a career of 50-plus years to working this out. He said that everything that he did drew upon and was motivated by his insatiable love of mankind. And one of the things that enabled him to do this was that he had inherited a concept of order which we tend to associate with Hegel, if we're philosophy majors, Molly, but which actually had existed implicitly in India from times immemorial, and today we call it unity in diversity. In other words, that the well-being and the development of the individual is not at the expense of the system, and the health of the system is not at the expense of the individual. We need individuals to be diverse in order to nourish the system. A colleague of mine who's written on violence recently has talked about the homogenizing features of predatory global capitalism. So in a way, this predatory feature goes along with the homogenization and the uniformization of human beings. Just a couple more things on the depressing side, and we're going to take off. But I do want to make sure this is in the back of our mind. There is a film going around called, I think it's called Soldiers of Conscience, and it's about what has happened to our service people in Iraq. And I was devastated by a particular scene there of training, basic training, where men are being trained to perform militarily. And in this scene, they were fixing bayonets on their rifles, and the drill sergeant said to them, okay, you guys, what's the purpose of a bayonet? And they chant out in unison, kill, kill, kill without mercy. Now, the fact that they're all singing it in unison, they're all uniformed, goes along, I'm going to say, with the degeneration of what's being done to these men and women psychologically. By contrast, in nonviolence, we train people to be better people. That's, if they have to look at one big distinction between violence and nonviolence, aside from the fact that violence gets an enormous slice of the budget and nonviolence gets practically nothing, one of the surest criteria to tell them apart is if you practice nonviolence, even if you lose, you win. Because when you are nonviolent, you have grown, and you come out of that a better person. So one of my criteria for rebuilding institutions and systems today is you can do anything you want as long as you do not degrade a human being. That's absolutely primary. Do you want to have a justice system for people who have committed crimes? Have one. Do you want to have a military system to defend the country? Have it. Do anything you want. But you have to do it without degrading and dehumanizing human beings, because that kind of damage is not recovered from very easily. So I'm going to go on to some of his other, Gandhi's other disarmingly simple concepts, and one of them was called heart unity. And heart unity means that no matter what differences subsist between and among us, we can be one. We can be united, provided that I spontaneously desire your well-being. You spontaneously desire my well-being. As long as I want you to be happy, we are one at a very deep spiritual level. And it doesn't matter that I have more money. I mean, well, realistically, I probably have a lot less. I come from another part of the country. I wasted part of my youth on Greek poetry. There's all kinds of differences among human beings. Yeah, I'm a recovering classicist. There's all kinds of differences among human beings, even differences of power, of authority, and of wealth do not have to interrupt the unity between and among us. As long as I want you to be happy, you want me to be happy, we are united and we can build a world of peace and harmony. So that was one of his concepts. And I'm going to now share with you an idea that, an illustration that I've tried to make of a kind of global picture of how Gandhi's approach can be utilized today. And I had a very, very enjoyable conversation with some of you this afternoon, and I was very happy that you kept keeping my feet to the fire nonviolently and getting me to say, how would we use it? How would we actually use it to face the problems we've got today? So at the core of Gandhi's system was his deep-seated belief in the Sanskrit concept of sat. And sat has three meanings. It's cognate, it's related to the English word is. It has three meanings. It's that which is true, as opposed to that which is false, that which is real, as opposed to that which is unreal, and that which is good, as opposed to that which is not good. And all of those three were united as a single entity and a single concept in Gandhi's mind. And this is where he got his incredible faith that satyagraha, clinging to truth, could not possibly fail. He said, ontologically speaking, he didn't really say that, but as a philosopher, it would be impossible for satyagraha to fail because it's based on reality. Now, if you look around the outside of the circle, you see all of these problems that we have facing us in the modern world, and of course I put globalization right up on top. And in his system, he developed a specific approach to each of those problems, which, if carried out, should lead to the complete eradication of that problem. I can't go around and talk about all of them with you. I really would be a roadie by the time that was over. But for example, right here at about 4 o'clock, you see the war system, which is one heck of a problem. Now, to counteract that, he was working on something called the Shanti Sena, or armies of peace, which would go into conflict areas without arms, with training in nonviolence, and do whatever they could to build down that conflict, offer their goods, their services, their good offices, and if necessary, interpose themselves between conflicting parties. Let me not kid you, nonviolence requires more courage than violence. That has to be borne in mind. And the morning after his assassination, he was going to an important meeting in Delhi to organize the Shanti Sena. So of course, a lot of time was lost. But in today's world, there are about 25 organizations that are doing this kind of work, including the Nonviolent Peace Force that Professor Dholakia mentioned, that I'm working with, which has been in Sri Lanka now for 4 years. And the idea is that if we could build up a cadre of, say, 2,000 people who were trained and ready to dedicate 2 years at a minimum salary to go we have gone into the most dangerous conflict zones in the world. Go into those zones. We have had a kidnapping of one of our people recently in Mindanao, but so far nobody has been really hurt or killed. Go into those areas and act as a humanizing force. Everybody else who's in that conflict is polarized, is saying it's this group against this group. You're in there practicing nonpartisanship and saying, I'm here for peace. I'm here because I care about the well-being of every single person who's a party to this conflict. And those things have a magical effect. We have rescued a number of children who had been abducted to be child soldiers. We've done incredibly wonderful things. So this is just, excuse me. I'm a New Yorker and I picked up some allergies in California, so I have to wet my whistle every now and then, especially when I get too emotional. But this is just one example of how an institution that Gandhi developed is applicable to a problem today. However, having said that, I want to bring you back for just a minute to that opening remark that I made about the people feeling that the mirror in Gandhi, which reflected the best that was in them, had been shattered. Notice that they were not talking about institutions. There are 1,250 institutions still flourishing in India today that Gandhi or his disciple Vinoba Bhave built while he was active. They're still going on. So there is all this institution building, not to deny it, but they didn't point to the schools and the hospitals and the khadi industries, the home cottage industries. They pointed to who he was as a human being and what he was able to do for them as a human being, awaken them to their own deepest inner potential, which is why I spend so much time studying the guy. I'm hoping that it'll happen to me at some point. Another example of his, before I go on to that, let me just finish with the wheel since we have it here. You will notice at the very top, at 12 o'clock, what he had to say or do about globalization. And that was his concept. Again, this is not original to Gandhi, but what was original to him was using it to build on politically in a situation of intense struggle. And this is the concept of Swadeshi. Sva means one's own, and Desha means region. Swadeshi means building from your own resources. Notice it doesn't mean staying within your own resources. You start within your own circle. When you have maximized your capacities and minimized your inabilities, that work naturally expands. I mean, look at the way Gandhi's work in India has cascaded throughout the world. In a decade or so after his assassination, there were something like 54 countries that had gotten free from colonialism. This is the power of one individual. So Swadeshi means, here, to give you one example, a young man came to Gandhi and said, I want to join the movement. And this is an example of a man's incredible restraint. If anyone comes to me and says, I want to join the Metta Center, I say, oh, thank you. Come immediately, bring money. But Gandhi said to this young man, where are you from? And he named a village. Gandhi had visited practically every one of the 700,000 villages in India. He said to that man, your village is a cesspool. For you to come and join the national movement and leave your village in that condition, that would be a sin. Go back, clean up the latrines, and then come and we'll talk about the national struggle. So that was his concept, that we all, as individuals and as groups, need to know what our strengths and weaknesses are, build on those strengths, overcome those weaknesses, before we try to solve the problem for somebody else. Gandhi also never, because of his dedication to the sacred nature of the individual, he never, as far as he could possibly help it, contradicted or overrode the will of a person. We had a bit of a discussion around this afternoon. I thought it was very interesting. But even someone like Winston Churchill, who said, I have not become Her Majesty's first minister to preside over the dissolution of the British Empire, but of course he did preside over it. And you can bet your bottom pound, or guinea, or whatever, that he wasn't very happy about that. But what Gandhi felt was happening when you practice satyagraha against an opponent, he put it this way. What satyagraha does is not to suppress reason, but to free it from inertia and to establish its sovereignty over prejudice, hatred, and other baser passions. In other words, he truly believed that he was helping the imperialists to get over their imperial addiction by making it impossible for them to go on ruling India. And Arnold Toynbee, the British historian, made a very interesting comment in this regard. He said, he made it impossible for us to go on ruling India, but he made it possible for us to leave without rancor and without humiliation. So that was Gandhi's peculiar genius, that even when he had to defeat your agenda, he was never attempting to defeat you. He was doing it because he believed that it would be even in your best interest to stop exploiting him, and he had the faith that on some level, even you will be realizing this. All right, well, I could go on about all of these marvelous aspects of Gandhi's vision, but the problem before us tonight is how are we going to globalize this? So what I want to move on to now is to show that even if you focus on the individual and his or her inviolable sacred nature, it doesn't mean that you don't pay attention to the big picture. What it means is your big picture grows out of the value, the will, the capacities of that individual. In some decade or other, 70s or the 80s, I was involved in a project that was based in New York called WOMP. It doesn't sound very nonviolent, but it stands for the World Order Modeling Project. And our approach was to start with the big picture, build a picture of the world, like a huge circle, or no, another person would come and say, no, it should be a bunch of squares, and others would opt for triangles, and we would draw lines connecting all these things in a sort of primitive Venn diagram. And we were basically fixing the world. We were reorganizing the whole world from these little offices in New York, from the top down. Now, Gandhi's approach was distinctly different. And here's a quote from him about what he called his oceanic circle model of the world. Life under his system, he said, will not be a pyramid with the apex sustained by the bottom. In other words, you turn on your computer and say, I want to make a flow chart of my organization. It's going to be one big box on the top, subordinate boxes underneath it, and so forth. He said, no, we're not going there. Instead, it will be an oceanic circle whose center will be the individual, always ready to perish for the village ready to perish for the circle of villages, till at last the whole becomes one life, composed of individuals, never aggressive in their arrogance, but ever humble, sharing the majesty of the oceanic circle of which they are integral units. It's interesting that he, in defining the relationship of each entity in this organization to the next entity, whoops, I almost said the next entity above it. That would be wrong, wouldn't it? The next entity outside it, the relationship was that you are ready to perish for the well-being of that entity, of that group. So in his understanding of life, the willingness to lay down your life, if necessary for a higher cause, is the pinnacle of human fulfillment. And it's in this model with the unity and diversity framework that the individual reaches his or her highest development. And note also that there is a faith position inherent in this which says that my well-being can be achieved without the compromise of yours. That is fundamental to his belief system. In order for me to be happy, you do not have to be unhappy. And there's a set of billboards in Petaluma, the town that I drive through today, where they're trying to sell apartments, condos. As you know, that's not an easy sell these days. And the slogan is that our loss is your gain. You know, this is fundamental to our economics, our sports, even medical school. It's fundamental, the belief that somebody else has to suffer in order for me to be happy. Gandhi wanted that swept away absolutely at the root. The belief out of which he built his whole life was that for me to be happy, you have to be happy. And sure enough, Martin Luther King Jr. comes along and he says, I cannot be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you cannot be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. So this idea of Gandhi's is now penetrated throughout the world of nonviolence. Now, it's for sure that the world is not going to sort itself out into oceanic circles anytime soon, and certainly not without our active engagement. So if we're going to put the person back in the picture, we need to start with a rough idea of what a person is. And my friend Houston Smith, at a meeting recently, said, for our culture as a whole, nothing major is going to happen until we figure out who we are. And he went on to say, the truth of the matter is that today we haven't a clue as to who we are. There is no consistent view of human nature, in the West today. And how can there be? Because we're constantly fed a false picture of human nature, that we're empty, that we're hopeless, that we need a new kind of toothpaste, that we're physical, we can only be gratified by sensation, that we're separate from one another, that we're determined by inanimate forces and little clumps of atomic matter called genes, and of course that we're condemned to be violent. Every single one of these propositions, I wish I had the time to go over them with you in detail, every single one of them has been contradicted by modern science. This is a great advantage that nonviolent work could draw upon, is that somehow somebody decided about 20, 25 years ago that science shouldn't study the breakdowns of human nature anymore, it should study the potential of human nature. So on our website we have a list of scientific researchers that can actually show you on the neurophysiological level how nonviolence works, how when someone threatens you and you do not respond with fear, you change that person. And let me just share a story with you that some of you have already heard. This is an episode that happened during these very severe communal riots in the state of Gujarat, Gandhi's home state, I think in 1992. And there was a mob that was coming into these villages to kill Muslims. And the village women who were left alone because it's an agricultural area, the men were mostly outside the village, the women would actually invite their Muslim neighbor into their house to hide them, to protect them. Of course, you couldn't really hide them because most of those houses were only one room. So they had the Muslim men underneath the puja table, underneath the altar in the house. So this is a wonderful picture. You have these Muslim people taking refuge at the feet of Ganesha in these Hindu homes. But seriously, these mobs who were enraged, who were armed, unfortunately, by the regime, were sent into these villages in this district. And what I'm about to tell you happened not just once, but happened over and over again. And we don't know how it happened in such a coordinated way because there was no planning. But they would come up to a hut, and the woman in the house would be standing there at the threshold, and they would say, "We think you're hiding a Muslim in there." And instead of saying, "Who, me? No, no Muslims here." Universally, they said very calmly, "Yes, I am." And then the mob, which is a little bit nonplussed, by this time would say, we want him out of there. And you know what the women then said? They said, "First kill me, and then you may enter." And every single time somebody did that, the mob turned around and went away. And this isn't a Berkeley woo-woo factor talking. We have hard scientific evidence that when you bring about that kind of conversion of a negative drive in yourself, you are directly affecting the human being who perceives that happening. So I'm going to just close now with some suggestions about what we can do as individuals to help mobilize this thing in ourselves. At the Meta Center, we have an institution that's grown up spontaneously. It's called the Hope Tank. The way it works, we set aside an hour for meditation, and then we have a potluck breakfast. And then we sit around and we have a very intense conversation about things like the things I've been sharing with you now. And our director, Shannon, are you out there? Came up with a threefold list, I think, that is extremely helpful for each one of us. And I think we should not undervalue the importance of ourselves as individuals. I know I have been a political activist for decades, and the first question that always comes up in our heads is, how do we organize this? The second question is, how do we get it funded? And that's usually about as far as we can go, because there's no way. But what I think Gandhi is trying to focus us on, what his mirror is trying to reflect back to us, is that we have all the capacity to bring about these changes in ourselves, even if we can't tell you step by step by step how it's going to happen. When we make these changes, we change the world to that extent. So what Shannon proposed was that we decided we're going to make 3 changes. And maybe you do this once a year, maybe you revisit it more often. You want to do a bread labor change. Bread labor was one of Gandhi's economic concepts, which stated that everyone, no matter what their status in society, should be involved in producing the basic necessities of life. You should be doing some gardening, I'm okay there. I harvest green beans every Wednesday home in our community. Or you should be spinning cloth, of course, would be a typical example in India. So food, clothing, shelter needs, everybody should be involved in producing these, whether they're wealthy or poor. So we can take a look at our own life, as we have done together and individually at Meta, and ask ourselves, okay, what can we do? Can, somebody will go into bicycle repairing, we have a new office now which has some land around it, we're going to plant some vegetables there. That's a bread labor change. Another thing we can do is a learning change, and I'm going to actually try and spend a few minutes with you giving you an example of how a learning change can work. And the third thing is a cultural change, and that's a pretty easy one. I have to take that back. It's going to be very easy for me to say this. It's not necessarily going to be easy to do it. So get ready, I'm going to say it. Don't watch TV. Just don't watch it. Forget it. Put it away. Don't watch it. Don't go to the kinds of movies that you would have been watching on TV. Don't read the kinds of books that are out of which they make the movies that you would have been watching on TV. Just stay away from violence. We have incredibly good evidence now, if good is the word that I want, so how harmful this is to us on every level, including physiologically. We went and, because we're making a film called Weapon of the Brave, we went and interviewed one of the neuroscientists who's working on some of the important developments that are so helpful now in nonviolence. And he actually said, if we could somehow miraculously get rid of the violence for 1 week, no fights, no watching TV, no listening to, well, I won't mention what kinds of music you shouldn't listen to, because you probably are listening to them. But just use your discretion. Don't expose yourself to violent stimulation. If we could, this is a scientist speaking, if we could get everybody to do this for 1 week, the violence would never come back. Because we are so evolutionarily organized for compassion and empathy, and we are suppressing all of that with the violent culture. So now let me share with you I'm going to try to do this briefly. Oh, this is a map, incidentally, of places in the world where nonviolent episodes have occurred in the last 25 years. I saw this on the wall of a church in Germany. Weltkarte der Hoffnung means, World Atlas of Hope. That should go over pretty well in Rhode Island, I thought. And here's another scholarly study showing all of these places where nonviolence has happened. The fact is that something more than half, almost 65% of the world's population today, 3.8 billion people, live in a regime which has experienced a major nonviolent change, most of which have been successful. We have other studies that show that in insurrectionary movements where you try to get rid of a dictatorship, if you do it nonviolently, they are 67% successful. If you do it violently, they're 22% successful. But I wanted to share with you now an idea that we've been working on to try to reconceptualize the millions and millions of progressive, useful projects that are going on in the world, but which do not resonate very well with one another. We actually, I believe, have more energy in the world doing good than we have doing harm. And I'm not naive. I know how much energy goes into doing harm. I think there's more energy going into doing good. But it's spread out, and people don't even know about one another, so they feel disempowered. They think they're living in a regime of scarcity, and they have to compete with one another to get enough resources. So one of the things we've been working on is to try to pull all of this stuff together into one picture. And I'm not saying that you should necessarily adopt this picture. I would be thrilled and overjoyed if you do. But I'm trying to show you that, as Gandhi said, nonviolence is a science. And we do have to learn it. Now, it's true that those women in Gujarat had not taken my course. Poor, deprived people had practically no intellectual exposure to nonviolence. So I'm not saying that you can't practice nonviolence. If you're a human being, there are going to be situations in which you can practice it. I can even tell you a few stories about nonviolent dogs. We'll get to that later. But at the present time, the change that we need to bring about has to be done very rapidly. Gandhi predicted exactly 1 century ago, in 1909, when he wrote Hind Swaraj, or Indian Home Rule, and people were asking him, how the heck are we going to get rid of Western civilization, or modern civilization? He said, you don't have to get rid of it. It is so full of contradictions, it's going to fall apart by itself. And I think that has started to happen. But that doesn't mean that we stand around fiddling while the thing falls apart, because the chaos and the violence could be so great that there'd be no possibility of reconstruction. So hearkening back to what I said at the very beginning, what we have to do is build the new world that we want and then let the old system fall apart. So this is an attempt to go in that direction. You see all of these different projects like petals around the daisy, like the Global Marshall Plan and redefining wealth and so forth. I don't have a pointer, but you can see them up there. And the idea is that let's say you're working with Peace Brigades International, which is an organization I like very much. They do this intervention work. They've been around for a long time, all over South America. They were in Sri Lanka even before Nonviolent Peace Force was. So where do you fit into the picture? Well, you fit into the nonviolence petal. You are one of many projects that are doing nonviolence. If you are doing a radio program in Berkeley, California, it's about 3 blocks from our office actually, called Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman, well, you're fitting onto the media picture. Similarly, other people who are doing other programs fit onto that same media picture. If you are doing a community-supported agriculture, which is springing up all over the country, then you are working on the Sustainable Food Project. So it's not like we have to agree on every one of these basic projects, but to understand that everything we are doing articulates through a larger idea to the central core. And the central core, here's my pièce de résistance, rests upon a quote that Martin Luther King articulated in his famous 1967 speech, where he said, we must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. So this is where the scheme that we've been working on fits in beautifully with the theme that I've been trying to develop with you this evening, that when we rediscover the capacities of the person, that's more than half the battle. And we do this through a project that we call From Consumerism to Community, where we try to practice ourselves and encourage other people to turn away from consumerism and to seek happiness and satisfaction in relationships with people. Okay, so for those of you who are philosophy majors, here's a picture of reality, clearly labeled. Reality is brown and it has that particular shape. And out of reality, there grows this flower, and you contact reality through spiritual practice, be it meditation or what have you. And then from that flower, with its core of community, replacing consumerism, you can nourish all of those big projects, which in turn will nourish all of those individual projects. Now again, I'm not exactly advocating that you adopt a scheme and put this on the window of your car, though I'd be very pleased, in fact, if you do. But what I'm trying to show is that we do have to do some actual scientific, and here I am demystifying Gandhi a little bit, we do have to do some scientific thinking about how nonviolence works and how we can build a whole new world order out of it. So, how about my question? What would Gandhi globalize? I believe that he would globalize truth. And that means that he would globalize love and wisdom, where we have been trying to globalize greed and fear. And the only way that we can access, that's not really a verb, the only way that we can get access to love and wisdom is through individual human beings. So he would globalize the remembrance of that fact and the tools to put it into practice. So this was Gandhi's greatest gift to the 21st century. It was a gift and it was a challenge, and I would strongly encourage all of us to accept them both. Thank you very much. See, This is a good example of mirror neurons. Professor Dall'Acchia was going to get up to warn me to stop talking, and I read her mind.
To show our appreciation for Dr. Nagler's presentation on Gandhi's contribution, I'd like to first call upon Joya and Micah. Joya and Micah are students in the undergraduate Colloquium class.
I already have a laptop, thank you.
On behalf of the Honors Colloquium, we would like to thank Dr. Nagler for sharing his thoughts on Gandhi and globalization.
We greatly appreciated the opportunity to have you come and talk to our class today with a meaningful question and answer session. And we're lucky enough to have you further elaborate on those ideals here tonight.
Finally, I want to thank you again for helping us in our efforts of demystifying India.
And
very
thanks so much. And
Thank you.
I'd like to appreciate that for our help here. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
I'd like to now call upon Michaela Cashman from the Student Nonviolence Involvement Committee here at the University of Rhode Island. Michaela?
Hi, Michaela.
Good evening, everyone. We are Michaela Cashman and David Nelson of the Student Nonviolence Involvement Committee here at the University of Rhode Island. And we would like to take a quick second tonight to thank Dr. Nagler for coming out and for speaking his words of wisdom on the modern-day globalization of Gandhi. On the behalf of our student organization and the Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies here at URI, we'd like to say that you've been an inspiration to us all, and would also like to present you with a small gift as a token of our gratitude.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Even if I have to pay for the extra luggage going home, it was really, really worth it. I'm very touched, really. I did not expect that.
Dr. Nagler will lead a passages meditation session tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. It was not planned ahead of time to make a big announcement, but if you would like to participate in a meditation session, it's going to start at 9 o'clock in room 402. 9:30. Oh, 9:30 in room 402 Libet Hall, right on campus. As I mentioned before, Dr. Nagler's book is available for sale. If you are inspired by how he is taking what Gandhi has said and actually translating it into actions that we can adopt individually, I think that book will provide further insights, and Dr. Nagler will be available tonight. With that, I'd like to open up the floor to questions. We do have a microphone here, so we really, really would like to urge you to come up to the microphone and ask your question. Thank you.
This is more of a statement than a question. I did not know what your talk would be this week, the title of it. So I asked the speaker last week the question, which was the title of your talk. What would Gandhi do in order to work with the concept of globalization, since in his early years there was no such idea. We didn't use the term globalization, even if we may have had the concept. And his answer to me was, I wish Gandhi was here to answer that. Well, fortunately, you brought Gandhi to us with such an answer, so for that I thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you actually have. I don't see how anyone could have any questions after this kind of talk. And I am as eager to get to the book signing part as any of you.
Hi, thank you so much for your comments. I wanted to ask about one of your earlier slides. You had the one that was like a clock. You had the problem of poverty and this notion of trusteeship.
Right.
Now, of course, we know in recent years there's been a growing disparity between the haves and have-nots, a concentration of wealth. What is trusteeship, and how can that be applied to the circumstances we face today?
That's a wonderful question, and it really was one of Gandhi's greatest discoveries. He borrowed the concept from English law. Trusteeship means that you do not own an object, you are its trustee. So let's say here's this laptop, slightly antiquated, which in the eyes of the law, I own. I paid some money for it, which is already kind of a convenient fiction. You know, Deepak Chopra, when Maharishi was asking Deepak Chopra to drop his practice, come to India, learn Ayurveda, give up all this stuff. Chopra's wife was there, and she said, well, where will the money come from? And Maharishi said, from wherever it is at the moment. So in the eyes of the law, I had this money at that moment, and I purchased this laptop. And in our standard conception, I own it. So if you take it away, you have stolen it, and you have to go through retributive justice and all the rest of it. But in trusteeship, I use this thing as a tool, and I have every right to use it as long as I am doing serviceable work with it. So if you enjoyed those slides, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I didn't have this laptop in my hotel room this morning when I was putting together things at the last minute. Now, what that means is, on the one hand, I don't encourage in myself the belief that I'm a better person because this object is in my possession, right? I'm its trustee. I have to make sure that the thing is put to good use, otherwise I'm not going to try to hold on to it. Now, what that does is very effectively brings about that shift from consumerism to community, because you're no longer asking yourselves, what do I have? But what implements can I use to serve my fellow human beings? It also has another tremendous strategic advantage, which is all previous attempts to equalize wealth have involved dispossessing wealthy people of their wealth. And they just overlooked one funny little thing. Wealthy people like their wealth. They don't like to be dispossessed of their wealth. That's why they worked so hard to acquire it in the first place. And they have armies and stuff like that. I'm reminded of Kenneth Boulding, who was a great peace scholar, one of the two great peace scholars in English, writing in English. He was at a meeting one time where people were going on and on about, eat the rich and do this to the rich and do that to the rich. And he said, but I like rich people. He said, a world without rich people would be like a zoo without elephants. So in this trusteeship system, you do not have to dispossess people of their wealth against their will, which of course is the core of violence. Instead, you encourage them to look upon their possessions as items of trust, which they then use for the well-being of the community. Now that may sound like it's difficult, but at least it's not impossible. Taking away rich people's riches has proven to be impossible. So it was, like many things that Gandhi came up with, it was both a philosophical and a strategic principle. Yeah. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had a question. I just thought you were, but I would have stopped sooner. Please.
That's all right. I was wondering if you could shed some light for us on what type of advice Gandhi might give us to deal with a problem like climate change, which is truly a global problem that must be combated not by one government or one person, but all individuals in unison. That's
a good question. And again, like the Shanti Sena thing, it's a topic that Gandhi never really spoke about very much because it wasn't his immediate concern. But if you look at the way he lived would totally solve global warming if other people just did anything remotely like that. At the time of his death, as you know, his possessions were worth approximately $5 in 1948 dollars. Yet millions and millions of rupees passed through his hand. There are these pictures of him at railroad stations where the train is going to be stopping for 5 minutes. He gets out of the train with a bag and goes around to every person and said, "What have you got? Throw it in there." And here are these village women whose wealth is in their necklaces, their Mangala Sutra and their earrings, and he's put it in the bag. So he collected millions and millions of rupees, and yet none of it stuck to him. So you saw him in that final picture, nice brown bare chest and a dhoti and a stick and a pair of glasses which have just been auctioned off somewhere in New York. And he loved the life that was close to nature. He loved sleeping outdoors on a cot surrounded by the other members of the ashram. He lived in such a way that there were almost no health costs in his life. He had a couple of operations, but mostly he didn't need to have any recourse to doctors, not to mention insurance companies. He didn't need to have recourse to lawyers. Of course, he was one. But for adjudicating conflict, if you had his attitude to life, you did not need a lawyer to be an intermediary between you and another person. So while he didn't really write about it very much, and he certainly didn't use the terminology that we use, I think he exemplified in his life what we can do as individuals to counteract that problem. Now, it's clear that that's not all that we can do, or all that we should do. We should be agitating through constitutional channels, and when necessary, we should be carrying out satyagraha. I do not hesitate to say that. If you truly believe that someone is doing something that's violent to themselves and violent to others, you have a responsibility to stop them. You first try to stop them by persuasion. But if that doesn't work, you have to be willing to do something. Now, there's a pretty good example in Canada. They were slaughtering harp seals, young harp seals, for their fur. And this group had been trying to get them to do that for years and years. And they went out and they stood in front of the harp seals, and that helped some. But one day they came up with the idea, let's assume that these people are doing this not because they hate harp seals, but because they're trying to make a living. I wonder if we could think of another way that they could make a living. So they did some thinking, and they went to these people with some ideas. They said, instead of doing this work and having us in your face every year, why don't you come down to this community and do this job? They stopped immediately. So we want to take that constructive approach, but let's face it, friends, if that doesn't work, we have to be ready to lay our bodies on the line. So to do that in a nonviolent spirit is the final recourse.
Just a question. What would you say to people who claim that violence is part of human nature and you have as much chance to change human nature as the communists did?
I would say that they are wrong. It's not true that violence is a part of human nature. What's true is the capacity for violence is part of human nature, as is the capacity for nonviolence. I was at a scientific meeting recently where people were arguing, excuse me, they were arguing, are we wired for peace or are we wired for war? And I said, we are not wired for peace and we are not wired for war. We are wired for choice. We have the free choice. If somebody threatens me, somewhere in my being, I have the capacity to respond to that person with love and understanding and not to respond with fear. And here again is where scientific evidence is very helpful, because it shows that when we do this conversion, we are not repressing the negative drive, the fear or the anger. We are actually, in some mysterious way, converting it into a positive creative force. I'm kind of surprised I haven't said this yet today, because this is one of my favorite ideas, and it usually comes out in the first 5 minutes of anything you ask me to talk about. But Martin Luther King Jr. was challenged one time, you caused a lot of anger and destruction, and he said, "We did not cause outbreaks of anger. What we did in our movement was to express anger under discipline for maximum effect." That is almost my favorite quote in the entire world of nonviolence. To express anger under discipline for maximum effect. And in that discipline, that self-restraint, the anger gets converted into something more creative like compassion.
Thank you very much for your talk tonight.
You're very welcome.
On your journey to the goal of nonviolent living, what was your greatest challenge? What was the most difficult thing for you on this path?
Oh my God. I'm not trying to come up with an answer, I'm trying to choose one of several answers. I think that each of us has buttons that get pushed. When they get pushed, we respond with anger. And I think that comparatively speaking, I'm probably not a particularly angry person, but that doesn't matter. What matters is my anger and how to deal with it. And the challenge I think it would not have ever been possible were it not for meditation. That's why I'm doing that presentation tomorrow morning. And Thich Nhat Hanh, who some of you know very well, actually said, you may believe in nonviolence, you may read Nagler's book, and you say, oh, this stuff is great, but when you go out there and the police starts coming at you with a club, unless you have some spiritual practice, which is converting distractions and thoughts and fears into some positive state, your nonviolence is going to fly out the window. So I'm still struggling to overcome not certain kinds of anger. Anger is anger. I'm trying to overcome anger in certain situations. And I'm going through the whole panoply of negative drives that every human being has, anger, fear, greed. They're all there, and when they come up, I struggle to deal with them. So I'm really not very different from anybody else in that regard. To think if there's anything, like really dramatic that I can say in this connection, but no, I just think that's what it is. I find that I go around I was a professor, so my training was to take simple ideas and make them complex enough so that intellectuals could understand them. And I can't believe I actually got paid for this. Not very much, but. And so, I'm trained to think of problems. And say I'm walking around our property, I'm thinking of some problem that I'm facing. The next thing you know, I think about some individual who's causing me that problem. The next thing you know, I'm going through a list of that person's bad qualities. Next thing you know, well, let's not even go there. So it's just on that very primary level of thought, and one of my favorite Greek philosophers said, the only thing that you can control, and therefore the only thing that you are responsible for controlling, is the imagery in your own mind. And, I'm also struggling with fear. Things come up and they frighten me, and I try and remember to say my mantra and stabilize my mind. It's 24/7 struggle. It just goes on in your sleep if you can really catch yourself. Yeah. Now, to my knowledge, I've never really done anything particularly dramatic or spectacular in this regard, though I do remember one time when I was still teaching classics, I was leaving campus at night and with a fellow classicist, and this is at a time of great racial tension on the Berkeley campus and in town, And suddenly there were these 4 African American people standing in front of us on the path, and you could tell from their body language that they were menacing us. They wanted to rough us up. And so I decided we just had to keep on walking, and when we got near them, someone said, "Hey buddy, you got a match?" And my colleague got very nervous and said, "Do I have a match?" I said, "Forget it, come on." Grabbed him by the elbow. We were saying Rama, Rama, Rama in my mind like crazy. We just walked away. And when we were safely down in the light, I turned around and looked up at these guys, which I didn't dare do before then. And I noticed that, again, from your body language, you could see it was very clear. What they were feeling was relief. They were relieved. That struck me as odd. Like 4, big, healthy people and 2 classics professors, like we were going to cause them any problem? I don't think so. So it's not that they were relieved that they didn't get hurt. They were relieved that they didn't have to hurt us. And again, this is a new science that's kind of opening up. It's been proven that in addition to post-traumatic stress, there's something called perpetration-induced traumatic stress, which means if you hurt another person, you are hurting yourself. And there's a study of this was done by one psychologist who went into a ward where there are amputees. These were Iraqi vets, and they were joking and laughing about, ho, ho, here's how my arm got blown off, and here's how I stepped on an IHD and lost my leg, ha, 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 all this machismo. And then so he asked them, did you kill anybody when you were in Iraq? Bam, conversation stopped dead. Everybody's looking at the floor, nobody's looking up, nobody's laughing anymore. So this is one of the reasons that we believe that nonviolence can be so effective, because even people who have the capacity to hurt you do not really want to do so. And if you have that belief, you will not be as frightened, and you will be helping them to get out of that tough situation. Having said all this, and I realize you're supposed to be asking questions, I'm not supposed to be going on and on, I'm sorry. But having said all this, I think it's very important for us to know that the way that you judge the success of a nonviolent event, this is chapter 4 of my book, is not to say that it worked, quote, you got exactly what you wanted out of it, but it had some beneficial effect. So I'm not saying that if you can go into a situation with your fear or anger somewhat under control, you're going to be safe. People have gotten killed practicing nonviolence. People have also gotten killed practicing violence, dare we say, in much greater numbers. I have a friend who is working with Christian peacemaker teams in Hebron, and he was walking down the street. He was accosted by a settler, and he thought, okay, I've done nonviolence training. I know what to do. So he stepped up to this man, and he stuck out his hand and said, hi, my name is Bill. What's your name? And the fellow kicked him into the gutter and said, my name is Mr. Haight, and I hate you. So I am not giving you a guarantee that every time you act nonviolently, you won't get hurt. That's not the point. The point is that you will inject some positive energy into the situation. Whereas if you defend yourself with violence, you also might get hurt, but you will end up injecting negative energy into the situation that makes matters worse. So, is there any time for another question? If there is, I promise to be more brief. One more question? This is called Stump the Sages. Silence is also, oh, here comes one, okay. Don't rush, we're not insured.
I'm in the HPR 201 class, and I was present in the discussion today. And
Yes, you were. You were sitting on the right-hand side, about the 4th row back.
Yes. I really liked what you said about going back to the thing about poverty and people's responsibility, trusteeship, and the rights of possession and things like that. And you mentioned things about individual responsibility of possessions and trusteeship and the relation to poverty, because I know that poverty and the poverty situation in India is a big question today.
We have some poverty here also.
Exactly, and all over the world. And I liked how you addressed it as like people's responsibility like, individuals have responsibility to themselves and their own possessions, and they should help other people, but there's also a responsibility of the people who are in poverty, and they have the certain rights that they have and what they're entitled to and what they need to do for themselves. And you mentioned it earlier. I don't know if you remember what
No, I remember very well.
Okay. I was just wondering if you could reiterate that
Sure.
again. Thank you.
You're welcome. What is your name?
Kelly.
Kelly, thank you. What I said, and I'm going to add something to it now, you know me by now. What I said was that Gandhi believed that in terms of what we, okay, I'll use the term possess. What we possess, there are three sort of orders of possession which are qualitatively different. The first order is food, clothing, and shelter needs. These are things that you need to stay alive as a human being. And the quality of those needs is that it is the responsibility of society to make sure that every person in the society has what he or she needs at that level. So if there's one person who doesn't have a home to live in, and there are thousands of them in San Francisco, I haven't seen any in Rhode Island, but they're all over. One person who does not have a roof over his or her head, that says that that society has failed. Now, I started something at the Berkeley campus called the Center for Violence Prevention. The first thing I said we should do is take care of the homeless people in and around our campus, because if these people are walking around eating our garbage, you know, we have failed. That is violence. So that's the first kind of need, food, clothing, shelter needs, basic, almost animal survival. Beyond that, every single one of us is born with a job. It's called our svadharma, our particular dharma or responsibility toward the world. Until and unless we discover our svadharma and start practicing it, we will never be fulfilled. Now, let's say I have this self-appointed svadharma of going around promoting Gandhian values outside India. In order to do that, I need a laptop, I need a car because of where I live, I need a bicycle, I need a tie for occasions like this. And all of these things I have a right to acquire. But the qualitative difference is you don't have the responsibility of giving it to me. If I can't do work that's meaningful to you, you don't need to support me. So I have a right to have those things, but I do not have a right to demand them of society. Now, let's go to the third and final order of possessions, and those are superfluities, things that I don't really need. Frankly, friends, back home in California, I probably consume somewhere between 3 and 5 lattes a week. Okay? Now, I came out on this trip. I've been on the road now for about 7, 8 days. I haven't had a single latte. I've gone dry. That proves that I don't really need lattes either for my work or for my survival as a human being. If I go back and buy myself a few lattes, it's just because it's a weakness. Excuse me. Even talking about lattes is making me sick. I'm not trying to inculcate guilt either in myself or in yourself. This is an affluent society, and if I want to buy a few lattes, it's not hurting anybody. But I mustn't regard that as something to which I have a right. So there are those 3 stages in our relationship to material objects. Now, what I wanted to add to this is that Gandhi felt strongly that the world was so calibrated. That quote is a famous quote of his, "There's enough in the world for everyone's need. There's not enough for everyone's greed." If one person exceeds what he or she needs, one person somewhere else is not going to get enough. So that's why he made the last part of his life an experiment with consuming only the very bare minimum that he needed to stay alive and do his work. When he was imprisoned in the Aga Khan's palace toward the end, again, let me say, I'm not advocating this for Americans, but he was living on a diet of, I think, it included 10 almonds a day. Now, Pyarlal, his secretary, who was there with him, thought, you know, he's a doctor, and he's saying this guy's not going to live on 10 almonds a day and a little bit of goat's milk. We got to slip him a little more food. And besides, he's not going to notice. So one day he gave him 12 almonds, which Gandhi ate very quietly. And you can imagine it took some time because he has no teeth, and eating almonds is a bit of a chore on your gums. He gets them all down, but he doesn't say a thing. And the next day, Pyarlal comes with the almonds, and Gandhi says, "I will only take 8 today." He knew exactly how many almonds his 110-pound body needed. And it was fun for him to not take one single almond more nor one single almond less than he needed. So he stayed very healthy on that regimen. I don't think I would survive on that, and I'm not recommending it, but what I'm suggesting is the intensity of his belief. And when he believed something, he carried it out in his daily life. He never asked anyone to do something that he was not doing himself. So what he did was he got everything down to the absolute minimum that he needed, and he felt that if everyone lived that way, with the Kantian imperative, nobody would be in poverty. That would solve the problem like that. Okay? So go out, enjoy an almond ice cream and a latte, and
Again, thank you very much, and thank you, Dr. Nagler.
Thank you.